Section 1.6 is subtracting integers. Our learning target here and what we're shooting for is to be able to say, I can subtract integers. Subtracting integers here is very similar to adding. We just have one step to start with. To subtract an integer, we have to change from subtraction to adding its opposite. So what that means is we change from subtraction to addition, and we take the opposite of what follows. So instead of a 7, we are going to have the opposite, a negative 7. And our first number didn't change. We dropped that right down. So it's 3 plus negative 7, which means the exact same thing as 3 minus 7. But when we have addition, we can use properties that are going to be helpful. So we always want to write it as adding the opposite. And now we go about it the same way we did last section when we have addition. So we take our absolute values. I have different signs, so I go ahead and subtract to find the difference. And I look, 7 is my bigger absolute value. It's negative. We look at our subtraction problem here, our addition problem here. Forget about the subtraction. Once we switch it to adding the opposite, we don't care about that subtraction problem at all. Now we only go from the addition. My 7 was negative there, so I have negative 4 as my solution. So 3 minus 7 is negative 4. We're going to try it here in example 1. Again, when we subtract integers, we're going to change from subtraction to addition and take the opposite of what follows. Remember, a minus sign just means opposite. So I'm going to have negative 10 instead of positive 10. And we bring down that first number. So here I have 4 plus negative 10. And we add it up just like we did last section. We take our absolute values. Here I had a positive and a negative. Different signs means I subtract and find my difference. And we look, 10 is my bigger absolute value. It was negative, so my answer is negative. 4 minus 10 is negative 6. On B here, I have 7 minus negative 5. I change from subtraction to addition, and I take the opposite of what follows. The opposite of a negative 5 is a positive 5. And I drop down my 7. 7 plus 5 is 12. We can take our absolute values and go through the process there if you want, but if you recognize that they're both positive, you can go ahead and add them up right away. And in C, I'm going to change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows. Instead of a negative 9, I'm going to have a positive 9. And I keep my first number exactly as it's written. So I have negative 2 plus 9. Here we add just like we did in section 1.5. We take the absolute value of both of our numbers. Here my signs were different. I had a negative and a positive. Different signs means we're going to subtract and find the difference. Bigger absolute value minus smaller absolute value. And then we look at that bigger absolute value. Here I had a positive 9, so my sign is a positive on my 7. Negative 2 minus negative 9 is positive 7. In example 2 here, we're going to evaluate variable expressions. Remember, variable expressions are any expressions that have a variable in them. And here, these have x's. So everywhere we see an x, we are going to substitute in a negative 9. So x is negative 9. I plug that in, and I bring everything else down. Minus negative 40. Now, I'm going to switch from subtraction to adding the opposite of what follows. Instead of a negative 40, I'm going to have a positive 40. So I have negative 9 plus 40. And now, we take our absolute values. We had different signs, negative, positive, so we subtract and find the difference. And we look, 40 had the bigger absolute value. It was positive, so my answer is positive. Same thing here on B. Everywhere I see an x, I'm going to plug in a negative 9. And I'm going to bring down the rest of my problem. So I have 7 minus that negative 9. I'm going to change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows. Instead of a negative 9, now I'm going to have a positive 9. And I still have that 7. Here they're both positive, so we can go ahead and add right away. We can do the whole absolute values, same signs, add them up, give the common sign if you want to. But if you recognize again that they're both positive, you can go ahead and add right away. So here we get 16. Feel free to pause here and give these a try. We're going to find the difference. Number 1. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change from subtraction to adding the opposite. So instead of being a positive 6, now I'm going to have a negative 6. I'm going to bring down that first number. The first number doesn't change. Now we can go ahead and add. So in order to do that, we need our absolute values of both terms. I had different signs, positive 2, negative 6. So we subtract and find the difference. Bigger absolute value minus smaller absolute value. Then I look. We said 6 was our bigger absolute value, so we look in our addition problem. 6 was negative. Our answer is negative. Go ahead and try 2. Again, I'm going to change from subtraction to adding the opposite. So instead of a negative 8, I'm going to have a positive 8. And I bring down my 3. Here they're both positive, so we can go ahead and add them up right away. Again, you can go through those steps if you'd like, but if you recognize that they're both positive, go for it. Give 3 a try. I'm going to change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows. So instead of a 4, I'm going to have a negative 4, the opposite. And I bring down that negative 7. Now, take my absolute values. I have the same sign, so I'm going to add them and find the sum. If we look here, my sign on both is negative, so my answer is negative, or we can look at our greater absolute value. It was negative, so it stays negative. And 4. Pause and give that a try. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change from subtraction to adding the opposite of what follows. So instead of a negative 13, I'm going to have a positive 13, and we bring down that first value just as it's written. Now we can add. Take my absolute values. My signs were different, a negative and a positive. So I take my bigger absolute value minus my smaller. We find the difference. Then we look, we said 13 was the greater absolute value, and we look here, it's positive, so my answer is positive. Again, go ahead and pause here and evaluate these variable expressions when y equals negative 14. You can give 5 a try. Here we know that y is negative 14, so everywhere I see a y, I plug in a negative 14. I bring everything else down exactly as it's written. Now we can change from subtraction to adding the opposite of what follows. Instead of a positive 3, we have a negative 3. And I still have that negative 14. We go ahead and add by taking our absolute values. Here our signs were the same, so we go ahead and add these up and find the sum. And we look, since both of our signs were negative, or the bigger one was negative, either way, we get negative. Give 6 a try. Here I have 25 minus y. And y, we said, is negative 14. First thing I'm going to do is change from subtraction to adding the opposite. So instead of a negative 14, I'm going to have a positive 14. And I bring down that first term, that first number. Here, these are both positive, so I can go ahead and add them up, and we get 39. Go ahead and give 7 a try. I wrote down y is still negative 14. Okay, we know y is negative 14, and that's the first thing I see. So the first thing I have is negative 14, and then I still have minus 10. I change from subtraction to adding, and take the opposite of what follows. Instead of a positive 10, now it becomes a negative 10. And I still have that negative 14. Now, we take our absolute values, 14 and 10, They had the same sign, both negative, so we go ahead and add them, find the sum. Same sign means sum. And we give that common sign or the sign of the bigger number. Either way, here it's a negative. And give 8 to try. Negative 9 minus y, and y we said is negative 14. First thing I'm going to do here is change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows. So instead of negative 14, I have positive 14. And now we add. Absolute value of negative 9 is 9. Absolute value of 14 is 14. Remember, those are just the distance away from 0. We don't care about which direction right now. 14 is the greater of the two absolute values. We look at our sign. One's negative, one's positive. So our signs are different. We find the difference. And then we look. Our greater absolute value is 14. 14 was positive in our addition problem. So here our answer is 5. Positive 5. We can use subtraction to find the change in a variable quantity such as elevation or temperature. We subtract the original value of the quantity from the value after the change. So we take where we are minus where we started. Example 3 is Kikumjani is an underwater volcano in the Caribbean Sea. Eruptions have caused the volcano to grow. In 1962, the summit elevation of Kikumjani was negative 235 meters, meaning it was 235 meters below sea level. In 2002, the summit elevation was negative 182 meters. By how many meters did the elevation of the volcano change? So again, to find change, we take where we are or where we ended in 2002 minus where we started, which would have been in 1962. Now I'm going to go ahead and change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows and bring down that first value. Now we add. I take my absolute values. I had different signs here, so I go ahead and subtract bigger absolute value minus smaller absolute value. And I get 53. We look at our signs. They were different. 235 was bigger and it was positive, so it's a positive 53 meters. Since it's positive, it means it went up, it grew by 53 meters. And it told us here that it has grown, so that's a good indication, a good checkpoint there. Feel free to pause here and give this a try. We're going to find the change in temperature. So in number 9, we're going to go from 32 degrees to negative 10 degrees. So to find change, we take where we are minus where we started. I'm going to change from subtraction to adding and take the opposite of what follows. Bring down that original value. Here, take your absolute values. Same signs, so we add them up and find the sum. And since both of them are negative, our answer is negative. So here, from 32 to negative 10, we said is negative 42 degrees. It went down, so that makes sense that it's negative. Try 10. From negative 45 to negative 80, you're going to start at negative 80 minus negative 45. Again, when we find change, we take where we end minus where we started. We change from subtraction to adding. And the opposite of what follows, bring down that initial value. Now we add absolute values, different signs, so we go ahead and subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. So here I have negative 35 degrees, which again, it started at negative 45 and then went down to negative 80, so that negative degrees makes sense. And I'll have to finish this in another video.